Thanks, Andrea. So, as Dan mentioned, we just spent a week doing rapid ethnographic research in Siargao, with a whole bunch of people here. And we have, discovered a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges and tensions that we can address through design during the residency. So, we went through around 5 towns, General Luna, San Isidro, Dapa, Burgos. We also passed through San Benito along the way, and Del Carmen as well. Talking to both people on the street, NGOs, as well as local government representatives from 3 towns at the very least. So we have 4 themes, as mentioned in your information packets: circular economy, transformation, climate resilience and disaster preparedness, ecosystem restoration and protection, and sustainable and resilient SME and communities. So we tried as much as possible to cover ground to address these 4 themes, but we were also cognizant of the fact that there might be other issues that will surface as we understand the local context of Siargao. Okay, so I'll just be sharing with you some of the broad findings that we encountered while doing the research last week. So, for circular economy and transformation, this is mostly manifested as a solid waste management problem. And solid waste management has a lot of entangled issues related to it. In Siargao, most of the water management is done on a household level. So houses will have their own pumps. They also have their own septic tanks, which means that when solid waste remains uncollected, then there is also a possibility that it also will lead to water contamination. Not to mention flooding, as well as disaster-related diseases like vectors, for example, or dengue. Um, a lot of the solid waste increased with the influx of tourists in the island in the recent decades. It's also entangled with maybe misunderstandings of the implications of solid waste for the community. As solid waste collection is currently a challenge for the LGUs, and also the segregation is also a challenge. And for the LGUs, it's also a question of whether, is it a carrot or a stick that's a solution or something else, something that we can definitely tackle during the residency. So tensions include tourism consumption versus local production, as well as resource preservation and economic use. For climate resilience and disaster preparedness, a lot of the conversations revolved around Typhoon Odette, which, as many of you know, struck the island in December of 2021. For Typhoon Odette, there was limited casualties, thank God, unlike the bigger disasters like Typhoon Yolanda, or unlike the extent of damage in other places like Cebu or like Palawan. But there was long-term damage to housing and long-term damage to crops. For the locals, they do feel that the recovery happened quite quickly, between 3 to 6 months. But there are also other challenges, like when we went into the different communities and LGUs and talked about disaster risk reduction and management, we found out that many of these were short term, mostly focused on evacuation and relief, with pockets of efforts in long term, but not really a more concerted strategic effort to avert disaster. And definitely disaster and climate resilience will entangle with other issues like ecosystem protection. So mangroves, or wetlands, more specifically, form part of the ecosystems of Siargao, and these are very critical to averting storm surge that affect the island. So the design focus here would probably be more infrastructural, more concerned with housing and ensuring that fisherfolk communities remain protected from storms in the present and in the future. Next slide. Okay, so as mentioned, for ecosystem restoration and protection, wetlands are one of the ecosystems that are critical to Siargao, but we also have marine ecosystems as well as ecological ecosystems. So there are some environmental laws that are already in place that have ensured that mangroves, for example, continue to thrive despite all the developments related to tourism. There are, of course, gaps in fisher folks' livelihood sustainability with the threat of commercial vessels also threatening their livelihood. Ecosystem restoration and protection is also challenged with coordination between local and national agencies, and there also needs to be community awareness on the value of these ecosystems. But also, I would say that local governments and NGOs working in this area, as well as participants in interdesign that are interested to work on these, also need to be aware of why communities sometimes are forced to engage in activities that are destructive into environment. And that usually comes down to the lack of social protections for health, livelihood, and education. So some tensions we observe are, of course, the conservation laws versus the need to do fishing, for example. Sometimes people see the conservation laws as too stringent, and this may prompt them to engage in fishing livelihoods that are, or fishing practices that are not that good for the environment. Of course, tourism growth and ecosystem protection is also a tension. One recent controversy in the island was the building of a resort that destroyed on the water, that destroyed the coral reef. And the coral reef is important to fisherfolk, but it's also important to the identity of the island as a surfing spot because the perfect waves that attract the surfers are also formed by the coral reefs. And of course, some other tensions regarding resource extraction and restoration and policy enforcement versus local needs. And finally, we have sustainable and resilient SMEs and communities. So the key tension that we observe here is, yes, tourism is increasing economic growth in the island, particularly in the town of General Luna. But more and more, this economic growth is becoming exclusive, and it's privileging more of the international migrants and the international business owners in the island, as well as those who are longtime owners of land, rather than people on the street or fisherfolk or farmers. A part of this problem also is the cost of living is also increasing. So people are living, farming and fishing to work in hotels or are studying tourism to go abroad, which of course poses a lot of challenges for sustainable livelihood and businesses in the island. 80% of the produce in the island is also imported from neighboring islands and provinces as far as Batangas and Manila. And it's also the same for raw materials in the island. A lot of these are also imported. So of course, that has an impact in terms of emissions, that has impact also in terms of whether the livelihoods and businesses present in the island are able to serve the people in the island. Why is it that we're still importing in Siargao, despite the presence of a lot of flora and fauna that can be used as produce and raw materials? So again, there are a lot of tensions here with tourism as well as conservation laws.